But okay, so I want to watch this just because there's been all the mass shootings lately, and of course when there's shootings, liberals, especially elected liberals or liberal politicians, immediately jump to calling for gun control, right? And it was almost, I was on social media this week, and it was almost crazy how quickly liberal politicians all started beating this drum of gun control, right after the school shootings. And it's like, I made a tweet saying basically, maybe some background checks, or you could have some common sense gun laws in the U.S. That don't qualify as, disarming the proletariat, because we always want to keep the proletariat armed and whatnot. But it's just interesting to me how the Democrats will not even entertain any other solutions, to this problem of mass violence in the U.S. other than gun control, right? It's just immediately beating the drum for gun control anytime one of these things happen, and it's like, why aren't we talking about, economic conditions or social isolation, or the deterioration of community and different things that can lead people to have mental health issues or lack of mental health care. There's so many other things that go along with this, including, the fact that one of the mass shooters recently was using the same insignia as the U.S.-funded and armed Azov battalion in Ukraine. So, yeah, one of the main videos I saw, or one of the videos that was going viral, was Beto O'Rourke. Basically did this little political stunt immediately after the shooting. So a lot of the Democrats and progressive Democrats, self-avowed socialists, in the American Congress were applauding Beto O'Rourke for this. And Beto O'Rourke's in a race right now for governor that he's been losing. He's down like 37% to 50% in the polls. So yeah, have you seen this video yet, Carlos?
I have not, and I'm kind of thankful that that I haven't. But I hated Beto O'Rourke, and I wasn't a fan of his followers either when we were organizing with Bernie. His whole thing about getting on a stool or something, I just found it so ridiculous.
Yeah, that's why I wanted to react to this video. Is like, I just got blasted with like deja vu. When I was watching Beto do this political stunt, it's like, oh yeah, this guy is a conniving Democratic politician who will hop on any tragedy to push his own political career. And that's exactly how we remember him being during the campaign. So he initially supported Medicare for all, and then backed out as soon as he started taking money from the health insurance industry. All right, so this is Gary Abbott, Beto's opponent for governor, was doing some event in Texas, and Beto interrupted the event in the middle of his speech to call out Abbott for not supporting stricter gun control measures. So this is, again, from Nina Turner's Instagram, former senator from Ohio, progressive, Bernie Sanders supporting type politician. So yeah.
Excuse me. Sit down. You're out of line and an embarrassment. Sit down and don't play this.
Shooting is right now, and you are doing nothing.
No, he needs to get his ass out of here. This isn't the place to talk this over.
This is totally predictable. When you,
sir, you're out of line. Sir, you are out of line. Sir, you are out of line. Please leave this auditorium. I can't believe you're a sick son of a bitch that would come to a deal like this to make a political issue. It's on assholes like you. Why don't you get out of here? Excuse me.
So yeah, I don't know what people think of that. Maybe there's some people who like that. Nina Turner was praising him, saying this is the correct energy, calling out this Republican politician. But me knowing Beto O'Rourke and having campaigned against Beto O'Rourke in 2020 with the Sanders campaign, and seeing that he's down in the polls in this election for governor by about 10%, there's no doubt in my mind that this is basically a political stunt, and it's basically him using a horrific tragedy to push his own political campaign. And again, you know, if like background checks are one thing, and you know it may help decrease gun violence slightly, but there are so many other things, you know, and there's so many other things wrong with this country and the material conditions of this country that lead to mass shootings that we talked about before we played that video. Social isolation, deteriorating economic conditions, the U.S. empire funding groups like the Azov Battalion in Ukraine when we have mass shooters in the U.S. Bearing the same insignia, committing these heinous acts of violence. There are so many things that the politicians in Washington could be talking about or taking action on to improve any of these things like the economic conditions or access to mental health care in the country. But that's never what they do. They just beat the drum all day about guns and then do stuff like this. The Democrats try and portray themselves as the good guys as compared to the Republicans. So that was my take on it, but I'm interested to hear what you got to say, Carlos.
Yeah, I usually try to abstain from these topics because they're just like tragedies. But I think that, you know, both sides are politicizing it. They politicize everything. That's part of the cat and mouse game of the two parties that really just function as one party of capital. But I think that in general, I'm going to talk about the discourse. It's the discourse that surrounds the shooting that I think it's worthy of critique the most. Because, I mean, we expect that from politicians. And I guess we expect the reaction from the populace not to be so enlightened either. But the thing that I have the biggest problem with is how all of these things, people always want to find easy one-point things to point at. Like it's just this or it's just that. And that's, you know, as a philosopher, I see that as, you know, what we would call in the Marxist tradition a metaphysical outlook, right? You're trying to reduce things to one or to another thing, and you're trying to fixate a problem that's a whole lot more complex on one thing. So, you know, I think that the one side says it's guns. The other side says, no, it's not. It's not guns that kill people. It's people that kill people. Well, that's okay. You have on one side guns, on the other side people. But you start thinking, well, what type of people? Are people in other countries doing this? And, well, not necessarily. So it's not just people in general. Now we have to classify, well, what's going on? And, you know, I think that as Marxists, we should see how it is that capitalism, specifically in the place where we're in, which is the belly of the beast, it's the imperial hegemon, how capitalism produces a destructive, a degenerate culture that leads a lot of people into conditions of depression, of suicidal thoughts, of alienation, of disconnection from themselves, from the community, from their environment, from any sense of purpose, from their work. How is it that this plethora of factors creates fertile grounds for these heinous things to arise? And that part of the discourse, which tries to focus, again, on the plurality of factors that are behind the fact, that is just not even part of the dominant discourse. That's completely outside. I mean, I've seen some Marxist organizations talk about, well, you can trace this to the culture of capitalism, patriarchy, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Yeah, that's right. But you know, that's not the general reaction. And it's like, how do we help take these events and help people understand that these are results of a system that that produces people in conditions that end up doing this. So in that sense, I think politicizing it is the right reaction. Like you have to you have to politicize it, but you have to politicize it in a mature way, in a way that actually tries to genuinely engage with the concrete conditions that led to this. And I think the only approach that can help in doing that is, of course, our approach, dialectical materialism.
I agree. And one thing that consistently is done by the media, and this goes back to Columbine, is they will ignore various factors that point to, other things that are wrong with our social system that are leading to mass shootings. So, like, for example, with Columbine, the story that most people think when they think of those kids is two kids who were bullied in school, so they kind of became mentally tortured and mentally ill, and then just snapped one day. And it's sort of this, almost sometimes told as like a tragedy about mental illness and these poor kids who were bullied until they snapped. But, they were pretty openly white nationalists, Dylan Roof and the other kid. If you read their manifesto, they were extremists, political extremists. So, we have to look at how our country props up extremist political ideology all over the world and has for the past 70 years. What a better example than right now dumping $52 billion into the neo-Nazi battalions in Ukraine, as we have mass shootings here at home, with shooters brandishing the Azov insignia. So, but that's not even being discussed on the media. Like I said, there was a chorus of Democrats after the shootings calling for gun control, but none of them discussing, the connection between white supremacy, U.S. imperialism, and the shootings that we've seen in the U.S. So yeah, and these shootings, unfortunately, are so common. The media's, they become experts at using them for clicks, using them to maximize their own, revenue, their own eyeballs, or draw eyeballs to their sites, but not allow these stories to show, any larger contradictions in our social system in its totality. So yeah, it's just really sad. It's a tragedy, and it's a sign, I think, like you were saying, of the deterioration and the contradictions of capitalism as it develops into a higher and higher stage.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's someone here in the chat that's saying, well, that at least the Democrats are proposing some form of a solution, and the Republicans are just kind of vaguely sending out thoughts and prayers. I think that's right, but the comments that we're trying to make are not aiming at finding band-aid solutions. You can do what the Democrats are asking for, and perhaps it'll help, right? Perhaps, maybe not. I mean, who knows? But the point is to analyze, what's really at the root of this, right? And that's much deeper than just we have guns, because other countries have guns, and the same thing is not going on. So yes, restrictions, but Dr. Asatar Bear, he put a pretty good metaphor the other day on Twitter, which is like you have a guy that's full of leeches, and reforms under capitalism, instead of taking off the leashes, just tell them here's more blood. These sort of solutions that are proposed by the liberals, that's the nature that they have, right? And I think that it is our job to go deeper than that, to show the limitations of that, and at times when what they're proposing does genuinely, in practice, lead to the betterment of workers, we should, of course, fight for it. But the way that Lenin understood how we have to make coalitions is not how I see a lot of people who proclaim themselves to be communists thinking about these coalitions. It's not just, an a priori alignment with the Democratic Party. Is you go in coalitions with the understanding that if this position betters the immediate condition of the working class, you should fight for it. But in the process of fighting, you have to be 100% critical of the shortcomings of the people who you're allied with, and constantly show workers how it is that those people that they're voting for, even though they might be improving their lives in certain ways, how it is that they're at the behest of capital. Even the segments that claim themselves to be representatives of the working class, right? So in this case would be the progressive Democrats. So it's so strange because you try to say something and then there's always folks who like take what you say and just synecdochally read only a part of it and then criticize that part. Like I'm not saying anything about the concrete way to approach with the possibilities, the real possibilities that we have right now. How to approach this? Obviously some gun control laws would be better, right? I'm talking about how to actually fix the problem, and that requires a concrete analysis of the whole situation.
Yeah, I'm reading these comments in the chat, and I don't even think either of us are saying much about how effective gun control would be. I think, we both believe that potentially, some more background checks or something could be helpful in decreasing the total number of shootings. Obviously, we're at a ridiculous number, 288, but, if you look at the list of, like, school or mass shootings, the U.S. is just so much farther ahead than any other country. So what we're saying isn't that that gun control is inherently bad, or it could never work, or that we can't have any gun control because that would count as disarming the proletariat. That's not what we're saying. We're not even making a comment really on the effectiveness of gun control. We're saying this is a sickness that goes much deeper. And the Democrats, although they're beating the drum for gun control over and over again, it's cynical. They're beating the drum for gun control in order to politicize this tragedy and push their campaign. I mean, and that's why I play that video of Beto O'Rourke. It's such a perfect example of it. He's losing in the polls. A mass shooting happens near him, and he turns it into a giant scene. And maybe he does, deep in his heart want gun control, but ultimately what we're saying is what he should be doing is looking at the country and the economy and the social system in its totality, and trying to address its deeper flaws. And we made a tweet earlier. It's like the U.S. dumped so many weapons into Afghanistan in the 80s, and Osama bin Laden's Mujahideen, when they were fighting the Soviets in this Marxist democratic government that was coming to power in Afghanistan. And the U.S. dumped so many guns in at that point, like, it's basically flooded the region with guns ever since. Like, extremist groups in that region have had a very easy time getting their hands on guns ever since. I was seeing also reports that the black markets in Europe and even in the Middle East now, in areas like Syria, are flooded with guns because of the weapons that the U.S. has funneled to Ukraine. And obviously those end up in the hands of like these unsupervised neo-Nazi militias, so a lot of those guns are going to the black market. And yet, even in Afghanistan, I think there were 3 or 4 school shootings last year versus the United States had 288. And this is a country that we flooded with guns, put guns in the hands of the worst extremists, invaded their country, destabilized it, and then left the Taliban in charge. And they still have 3 shootings, or 3 mass shootings compared to 288 in the U.S. So, what we're saying isn't, no background checks, absolutely no forms of gun control ever. We're saying that might be a tiny part of the solution, but there's so much more that needs to be looked at. We need to grasp the situation and grasp the problem by its roots. And the Democratic Party is not doing that, nor are they attempting to do that, nor are they going to attempt to do that, which is, we can't be naive about that, right? This idea that the Democrats are a little bit better than the Republicans has proven to be false. It's just, they're political opportunists. And they'll weaponize your compassion too. They'll try to make you think that they're the good guys and the Republicans are these horrific, evil comic book villains, but in reality, both parties are absolutely subservient to capital.
Yeah, absolutely. It's just a good cop, bad cop skit. And, this isn't new. Like, this is quite old. Lenin talks about the liberal and the conservative flanks of capital, and that each play a purpose, right? There's almost a dialectic between them that insofar as they continue in and out to have something to blame constantly in the other, they can both continue in power, right? And Lenin even says in various places, well, it's actually the liberals that are a little bit more sinister because of the fact that they present themselves as your friend. It's almost like the quote that Malcolm X would, say decades later about the liberals being a wolf in sheep's clothing, right? And it's that sinister element that takes even the parts where, in terms of reform, they're a little better. That forces us to, do a study of their value beyond just the places where they're a little better. It's that sinister element that, when you bring it as a factor into the calculation of does it genuinely help in the long run? I mean, we've had as communists a policy of supporting Democrats to fight against fascism in the Republican Party since basically the 70s. And all we've seen in the political line of both parties has been a drastic shift to the right. So, I mean, Einstein used to say that insanity is doing the same thing over and over and over again and expecting a different result, especially under the same circumstances. And it's like, well, shit, where are we at now after continuously thinking over half a century that, the Democrats are better, let's side with them. So I don't know.
All right, they kind of make it feel like every year it's a new thing, right? Like, oh, now this year Trump's running, so you have to vote for Biden. You have to vote for the lesser of two evils. This is a unique evil, but if you look historically, they've been saying that since the 60s, and a lot of our socialist leaders are some of the most successful socialists in American history have been telling us this for years, telling us that both parties serve capital. Even before, the 40 years of neoliberalism, where, as Carlos said, the two parties have both shifted extremely far to the right. So I have like this Malcolm X quote up right now, pretty famous quote, where he says, "The white liberal differs from the white conservative only in one way. The liberal is more deceitful than the conservative. Both want power, but the white liberal is the one who has perfected the art of posing as the Negro's friend and benefactor." Malcolm X. So they've been telling us this from the 60s, and people will still make this argument today and weaponize compassion, call you privileged if you won't vote for the Democratic Party. And it kind of goes back to what we were talking about at the beginning of the stream with how dialectical materialism helps you see things clearer because you're looking at them in their context. If you look at each election in isolation, it's really easy for the liberals to trick you into voting for their candidate. They'll portray Trump as the most horrific, uniquely evil monster in American political history, so therefore you have to vote for Joe Biden. And if you look at the election in its isolation, you might think that, yeah, maybe Joe Biden is the lesser of two evils and it would be amoral to vote for him. But if you look at Joe Biden's political history, or if you look at all the horrible regime change acts and acts of violence and drone striking of civilians that was committed under Obama when Joe Biden was vice president, you realize that this is just a power-hungry warmonger, just like any Republican neocon. So yeah, it's interesting, and I guess going back to what we were saying too about dialectical materialism unlocking so many different fields. I studied political science, and all I really got from it, I got a lot from it. I learned a lot, but I was like, the U.S. is like evil. The United States is this evil empire. And I just can't believe they act this way. They're so immoral, But then once I discovered Marxism, and you see everything as a product of class struggle, and you see how capital is what inspires imperialism, and how capital seeks to dominate markets and labor and resources all over the world. It's like, oh, this is why the U.S. is doing imperialism, right? They're not evil. They're driven by capital. Right? Che Guevara, there's a quote, when he was a kid, he thought the U.S. was run by like evil dark warlords, like dark warlocks, like evil wizards. But as he read Marx, he realized America was just run by the capitalists who were trying to exploit the global South for their own benefit. So if you looked at things in a dialectical way and look at things in their totality, it helps politics make a lot more sense. And I think it helps you not look at each passing election in isolation, and rather look at things as a historical class struggle. I was kind of rambling there, but yeah.
No, you're absolutely right. That's funny you mentioned that about Che. He had, especially early on, some like weird thoughts. He, as early on in his doctor career, he would recommend people to drink Coke as something that was healthy. And in Cuba, while they were at the beginning, when basically all the scientists and engineers left after the revolution, and they had to like figure out what the hell are we gonna do. He was like the taste tester for the the Coca-Cola, like the bootleg Coca-Cola factories that they were trying to do. But yeah, that was completely out of context. But